Hi, I'm David Freudberg, host of Humankind. Listeners know that we explore many realms of the human journey, and some of our podcasts, including some of my favorites, delve into wisdom traditions, sometimes ancient writings or teachings that arise from a variety of backgrounds, sources that help us to focus on truths that really matter. And a lot of this boils down to connecting to something bigger than ourselves, to see that we're all part of some mysterious river of meaning, that the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts. When I can get calm and touch that inner place of quietude, it points me homeward. Thank you. Coming up on a Humankind special, about 1.2 million people are in U.S. prisons, and almost all will eventually be released. But what can interrupt the revolving door through which many inmates end up back behind bars?
A fundamental shift in self-identity. That's what's really going to interrupt it. How do you come to experience yourself and see yourself in such a fundamentally different way that crime is no longer of interest to you?
Author and counselor Robin Casarjian believes houses of corrections can be transformed into houses of healing from trauma. We'll hear her remarkable experience with prisoners, as well as from former inmates who followed her guidance and undergone a profound change. I'm David Freudberg. Stay with us for Helping Prisoners to Heal from Humankind. Humankind is produced in association with GBH Boston and Documentary Educational Resources. This special project, Helping Prisoners to Heal, is supported by the Humankind Program Fund. Helping prisoners to heal from the traumas that landed them behind bars. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Can the cold world inside prisons, sometimes called houses of correction, be transformed into actual houses of healing? Robin Casarjian is a petite woman in Boston who has devoted decades to that quest, and she has often put herself in what many might regard as dangerous places.
I'm 5'1.5" and 110 pounds soaking wet. And I feel completely safe when I'm in a prison. I mean, I never feel threatened.
And you've been going into prisons for how long?
30 years.
So that's pretty striking that you feel safe.
Yeah, no, I'm not walking in some part of the prison where there aren't other people that if I needed protection that they wouldn't be there. But I find that there are a lot of people also in prison who I feel I would be totally protected by if there was ever an issue. I feel like I have a force of people surrounding me that would come to my aid if I ever needed that.
Robin herself has never been incarcerated or even accused of a crime. But as a counselor and educator, her book, Houses of Healing, has reached thousands of inmates throughout the U.S. In addition, learning materials she's developed for youth involved in the justice system have been adopted by many of the largest states. Based at the Lionheart Foundation in Dedham, Massachusetts, she's been on an unusual mission.
To give people effective programming so that they don't come back to prison, so that they don't cost the taxpayer more money, more importantly, so that there aren't more victims in their wake, and so that they aren't as inclined to be a victim of their own self-destructive behavior, like going back out and rather than being in recovery, going back out and doing drugs once they get back out into the community because they haven't learned how to manage their own emotional life and to heal some of the trauma and the issues that propelled them to being in prison in the first place.
I encountered quite a bit of trauma, I believe, as a child growing up.
Daniel Silva of Sacramento, California, was born in Ecuador, South America, and came to the United States as a child. He was released from prison in 2015. Now, age 66, he did 39 years inside the walls in California for murder. As a youth, there were problems in his family.
We encountered quite a bit of alcoholism in the home, and I saw a lot of violence through a stepfather that was not the perfect father that would guide a young kid into being a positive individual. And through the attempts of trying to stop him from hitting my mother, I encountered, stuff that no kid should, experience as a kid. And that led me to, getting out to the streets a lot and meeting all the folks out there that were, the thugs in the community that were coming from the same background as myself. And it just kind of just year to year, and by the time I was 13, I'm already joined up with a gang that no kid at 13 should be a part of.
Daniel's story of childhood trauma follows a pattern that Robin Casarjian has seen frequently in her years of outreach to people in prison.
I would say from my experience of having worked with hundreds and hundreds of people behind the wall that there is a tremendous amount of suffering that individuals have experienced. And again, this isn't to say, oh, you poor thing. It's never about excusing. It's about telling the truth. It's about coming to see the truth so you can participate in the healing process that will help liberate you and lift you out of the pain and the distress that those types of experiences naturally result in.
About 1.2 million people live behind bars in the United States. Many were convicted of crimes committed while they were caught up with drugs, from opioid addiction to drunk driving. Some incarcerated people have experienced racial disparities at the hands of courts and police. A high number were abused as kids. But under the strain of prison, where your humanity may be reduced to the number you wear, healing from trauma can be a trial unto itself.
I was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. So I fought the death penalty, and what I did was wrong, and there was no justification for it. However, at the time, I rationalized somehow that it was justifiable.
For much of his life, starting in his 20s, Alvin Kimbrough was incarcerated in California. Next to Texas, California holds the largest number of prisoners of any state in the U.S. We're talking with several people who've been confined in that system. Alvin's anguishing time in prison gave him many years to contemplate previous events.
The circumstances were that I was kind of living a average lifestyle. I mean, I worked, I had a job, a career, things of that nature. But what I did do was that my relationship dynamics were not well. So I was entertaining people that I shouldn't have, which eventually kind of got me into domestic violence relationships. Eventually, that escalated to have individuals that were out looking for me because of whatever reasons they may have had. They found out where I lived at one day and tracked me down, came to my home, presented themselves as threatening, menacing. I thought at that point, or at least I rationalized at that point, that I had a situation where my life would be in danger. So I essentially built a story in my own mind for what I needed to do to justify killing other human beings. And I did. I shot them and killed them. And I ended up subsequently with a sentence of 25 to life. I called second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter. And that's what sent me to prison.
Alvin Kimbrough was released 5 years ago at age 52. Today, he works as a traffic control expert at construction sites and other venues in Northern California. A great deal has changed for him. Alvin credits Robin Casarjian's book for turning his life around.
At one point in time, I was in a cell with someone who was extremely dangerous. And he had put up about 4 other people that he was in a cell with in the hospital. And so the guy and I ended up in the same space. And he was hostile. And at that point, I was just determined not to make the circumstances even worse.
Right.
Because I knew the levels that these institutions can go to, and they can be extremely unhealthy for you at times. So I had a great deal of discipline. I was exercising. I was in really good shape. And so the individual recognized that, because at that point in time, I would just sit on my bunk and read my Bible. And he would play music and it would be disruptive and be loud, and I would say nothing. I would just be very disciplined. And so as time would go by, 2, 3 days, 4 days, the guy said, "Hey, man, I know everybody thinks I'm a jerk, but I'm not. It's just that, I'm from Compton, and my mother was this type of person. My father was that type of person." And he started to, become extremely agitated and angry. And as he spoke, the more, he became angry. And he told me about how his father was murdered and how his mother was a prostitute and how he was sent to prison for 45 to life at 18 years old. And as he talked, he became, angry and angry. And then eventually he got to the point where he literally started crying. And at that point, I didn't understand, like tears. I didn't want to understand it because I was trying to build a hardness in me so I can survive the circumstances. But whatever was in me at that point, and I thank God for it, I didn't feel hostility towards him at all. And I got up off of my bunk and I reached over to this brother and I hugged him and I told him that, "Hey, man, we all we got." And that was the first day of my adult life that I learned to be a brother. And from that day, he and I, of course, got along much better. But I learned that, hey, I can be a man in these circumstances, and I do not have to be an animal. And I don't have to transform to what's going on around me. And so I got a little courage from him. He was my first real teacher. And from that point, I began to stretch out my humanity slowly.
Alvin and others we're hearing now return to prisons often, this time voluntarily, to lead classes based on the principles of Houses of Healing and a related project called Self-Awareness and Recovery. The lessons he learned derive from his own experience.
I was being corrected by life. Life was giving me an opportunity to become a human being and have an intimacy with my humanity, which I had lost by committing a crime. And the individuals that did it were the very people that other people felt had no value. They became my liberators, because along the way, I would meet many men just like him. Rather they would be the guy like later on to come in your life like Daniel and I, where we can share a group, or rather that we could share a bowl of food. As Dr. King would say, as they slowly but surely turn, the very places that's supposed to be a place of, shame, like a jail, and they would transform them dungeons into havens of humanity. And so for me, rather it was, the other fellow prisoners or sometimes correctional officers, and definitely, without question, it was always my family members. I had a mom that still is alive. She never missed 1 month in 20. She never missed a month.
Wow.
And that kept me alive because I never felt forsaken. And I saw a lot of men that were forsaken. And it's hard to keep hope when, you don't have connections to the community that, that are bigger than you, because there's very few things that you can see that give you some type of inspiration, especially when everything around you is concrete and steel, and even human beings are hardened on the inside. So those individuals were watershed moments for me, and then it was a process throughout the entire my entire prison career was one constant affirmation after another that life was able to transform itself into something better.
In the high-stress conditions of prison, the pressures of incarceration can build. There's little privacy, a large number of convicted criminals are crammed into a small space, and some of them may be ticking time bombs, capable of hurting others or themselves. Robin Casarjian.
I think if they're really in an unhealed state, they have a lot of unresolved trauma, they're just propelled to be self-destructive and not have the emotional regulation competencies that are needed when they get triggered. So any trigger can not that they necessarily want it, but the trigger can trigger them into behaving in a way that is an expression of no emotional competency and regulation.
So what can interrupt the cycle of perpetual misery, recidivism, ending up back behind bars? What can interrupt that?
A fundamental shift in self-identity. That's what's really going to interrupt it. How do you come to experience yourself and see yourself in such a fundamentally different way that crime is no longer of interest to you?
For Robin Casarjian, that means asking the most basic question, who am I? Who prisoners believe they are, she says, informs their choices, including poor choices. Through self-reflection, a newfound positive identity comes into view. And that may be inconsistent with past behaviors that have undermined their well-being. But first of all, it requires calming down through meditation or other relaxation practices.
When they are able to integrate these emotional regulation tools into their life, when they're able to begin to heal some of the trauma that they have experienced, so that they really begin to understand themselves and release some of the hurt from their childhood, from their lives, they become themselves, not the wounded individual who's kind of on top of that core essence of goodness and health that they may never have had the safety to align with in the past. And so therefore they couldn't bring it forth into their life on a day-to-day basis.
It reminds me of the phrase, hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
People who've sustained trauma and who have trouble getting past it. Can you describe the kinds of trauma that you encounter in prisoners and the sort of trap that they find themselves in?
It could be any of a variety of traumatic experiences, of being abused by a parent, not having your parents there, being abandoned, growing up in a violent neighborhood, being diminished by the school experience rather than enhanced by it, put down because you had learning problems, say, that weren't addressed. I think and it could be even more global issues of racism, classism, But if you have a stable home life, you can overcome most anything.
Of course, some people behind the walls are struggling with mental health challenges. And in our society, the mentally ill, especially those who are poor, are far likelier to land in jail than in a hospital. So there are many reasons why people might get entangled in antisocial behavior. And for Robin, one theme keeps coming up.
They've experienced some type of trauma, some type of harm that they haven't had the opportunity to, in a safe environment, to look at, to address, to heal. And as a result, that harm survived becomes a harm projected out onto the world, because it's pain-based behavior. They haven't resolved their own pain, and so that pain-based behavior gets projected out into the world.
So you've mentioned pain-based behavior. It just seems to me like so much of the dysfunction that I observe in our society, and sometimes in my own life, pain is the driver.
If a child doesn't have a safe environment, there is the pain of abandonment, the pain of a lack of safety, the pain of internalizing many messages that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, this is happening to me because of me, rather than the inability of the adults in my environment being able to give me the level of safety that I deserve.
And it's very easy for young children to blame themselves for the circumstances that surround them, even if they're blameless.
Absolutely. They internalize that and they personalize it, that somehow they're deserving of that. And so the process of healing is a process of helping people to begin to peel the layers of the onion off on this emotional response, see more clearly what has triggered their responses.
We're examining how inmates can recover from their emotional wounds. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. For more information about this segment, Helping Prisoners to Heal, and to obtain audio downloads or CDs, please visit humanmedia.org, and you can send us an email there at humanmedia.org.
I was raised in a very strict and structured Christian home, and my father was born in 1925, Tyler, Texas. My mother was born in 1933, Jackson, Mississippi.
Jerome Anderson, now released from prison and living in Sacramento, works with self-awareness and recovery and the Houses of Healing program. While serving time in California for murder he committed in his 20s, Jerome's incarceration included spending 8 years in solitary confinement, known as the SHU, or Secure Housing Unit. He, too, had a childhood marked by adversity.
I suffered trauma through the fact that my older sister was murdered at a very young age, and we was not allowed to process it. And so, although I thought that my father couldn't connect with me as a youngster, as a youth, I realized later on, as I started to go through the Houses of Healing, that they did not know how to effectively communicate with their own children what was going on. And so with their best efforts of sending me to school and just micromanaging everything we did, I looked at it like they didn't trust me. And so I started to, of course, outwardly I would comply, but inwardly I would start to rebel.
And that set up an internal struggle, which Jerome now realizes he didn't know how to process. He lacked adequate skills of self-reflection, which bred an intense feeling of insecurity that ultimately led him down a destructive path.
Not being able to communicate or ask questions, now my communication style became, instead of being assertive, I was taught to be passive. And so that gave me a lot of negative self-talk. I compared myself to a lot of other youth. I didn't feel adequate. I felt powerless. I felt stupid, insignificant. And I did not understand why I was not allowed to ask questions. Where was my sister? Why is all these people always asking, how are you doing? And then also the image that I had to portray to be perfect, like everything was okay to be a strong black man in the 70s.
But through the exercises in introspection as taught in houses of healing, Jerome was able to develop new understanding about his earlier life that would unlock some of the confusion that had once gripped him.
I had an identity crisis as a youth. And so some of that was, for me, I was a young African-American, skinny male in a predominantly Caucasian environment. And so I didn't look like a lot of my peers. And I had a speech impediment, and I was told I was stupid, I was slow, all these negative things that I heard from other people. And ultimately, I started telling them to myself. And I started making negative contracts within myself. I will never be a victim. I will not let someone hurt me like they hurt my sister. Or I would tell myself, I have the right to protect whoever I love at any cost. And so it was that type of thinking, those type of thinking distortions, that definitely needed to have some cognitive reframing, restructuring. And so it was a long process. It was a painful process, one that I wanted to run from for so long. But the fact was that I could not deny that my choices ultimately made me. And it sentenced me to a life without the possibility of parole, plus additional years in prison. And so going as a young 25-year-old boy to a high desert state prison, going to a Pelican Bay state prison, B yard where there was wars, I didn't know who I was. I wanted to be like everybody else. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to feel inadequate. I didn't want to feel powerless. I wanted to feel accepted. And so for me, it was seeing other people gravitating towards houses of healing and inviting me to, hey, look, you may not be ready to go to a group, but in the quiet hours before you're ready to lay your head down and go to sleep, read this. And it started helping me slowly just put the pieces of my life back together. And I realized that wasn't me who committed this horrendous act against a loving individual, shattering their family, altering my own family's lifestyle.
Some of these insights occurred to Jerome during his time alone in the secure housing unit. And Houses of Healing has tracked 200 males, aged 20 to 66, who studied the program while in solitary confinement in 3 California prisons. Their average time in solitary was 4 years. A survey measured improvement in identifying triggers, handling anger, and ability to remain in control when upset. Again, Houses of Healing author Robin Casarjian.
The intervention that I do, that I encourage with the Houses of Healing program, which clearly has a very positive impact on people, from teaching as I mentioned, teaching the emotional regulation piece, being very explicit about who are you really. We work a lot with this concept of the inner child work, where they go back into their childhoods and access that adult part of themselves that can be there for themselves in a way that other people weren't capable of being there.
And I just said, I want to go back to being a kind person.
Jerome Anderson.
I want to go back to being trusted. I want to go back to being sensitive. And if I have to live the rest of my life in here, I just want to have my purpose back. I've always loved people. How is it now I'm hurting people, or I'm encouraging other people to hurt people? And I just became so disgusted with it. And I said, everything that I once learned that took me from the loving young individual, my true spiritual nature, my core, I wanted to go back to that. I unlearned all the negative stuff, the cussing, how to look hard and how to walk crazy. And I just started slowly chipping away at that. I started working on my speech. I started putting positive words and affirmations in my mind every day. And I ultimately, through the help of many mentors and life coaches in prison and on the outside, I tapped into my motivation and I went down the stairs and I rescued that hurt little Jerome. And I picked him up, I loved on him, I whispered loving words to him, and I carried him back up those stairs. And there was forgiveness, there was clarity, there was understanding.
And that was happening in your mind's eye.
Absolutely. And I started to live it out every day. I just told myself today, I am not going to use profanity. And so I just started with the first 5 minutes. And then I started the next half hour. And days turned to weeks, weeks turned to years. And I'm happy to say that I'm worked on my profanity, and it's been 7 years. I've been clean for 12 years. Sobriety from drugs and alcohol for 12 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's one of the blessings, because once you really get your inner power and your true freedom, no matter where you are, you're at peace. You're beneficial to society. You're beneficial to whoever you come in contact with. And that's just, to me, that's why I speak volumes about houses of healing and self-awareness and recovery.
Coming up, further revelations for incarcerated people striving to put their lives back together when Helping Prisoners to Heal continues on Humankind in a moment.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. Please subscribe to our free weekly podcast. The title is Humankind on Public Radio. You can find it at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all major podcast services, as well as through our website. Again, the podcast title is Humankind on Public Radio. And if you'd like to support our program, please visit humankindpodcast.org, and at the top, click on How You Can Help. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Freudberg. This podcast derives from the Humankind Public Radio series, which I began hosting back in 1997. Our program recognizes how hard it can be, but also how necessary, for us to hold on to our humanity. So we've sought out people with stories that illustrate how they approach that quest, to aim high, to treat others as we'd like to be treated, to see others as more similar to us than different, to strive for patience and personal grace even in adversity, to be part of the solution, not the problem. We hope our podcast helps to reinforce and inspire your own quest. Thank you. This is Helping Prisoners to Heal, a special project from Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. More than 80% of prisoners in America are confined to state-run institutions, and over 9 in 10 of them will eventually be released back into the general population. So society benefits from rehabilitation of inmates. It improves the chances they'll lead productive, pro-social lives after release. But that can be hard for the 1 in 10 prisoners living in solitary confinement. In some cases, they've taken a self-study course based on Robin Casarjian's book, Houses of Healing, and the results are encouraging.
First of all, there you are. You don't have as many triggers in your environment. This is an amazing statistic in solitary. 95% of respondents reported feeling more hopeful about life most of the time, or almost always, as compared to 29% before the course.
So what would give somebody in solitary the ability to feel more hopeful?
I think what helps them to feel more hopeful is a self-understanding that their life can have meaning regardless of where they are, that their time can have meaning. The workbook for this program is called Making Time Count. wherever you are. You make your time count. You make your life count. Here you are.
Even while doing time.
Even while doing time. And especially in solitary, where there aren't any distractions. There's like nothing else to do. So here you are in this environment. To me, it's really criminal when prison systems don't give people in that environment ways to help themselves. Throw them in a cell and not give them the kind of tools that they need to learn meditation, to come to a different kind of understanding in terms of their own identity and who they are. The first question we ask in that is, who are you really? Am I just some, as I mentioned before, am I just some criminal? Am I just some horrible human being? Am I just some throwaway? Or is there something more to me? And I begin to entertain a possibility of being a decent, good human being who can make a positive difference in the world. The people I hire on the ground, some of them in California, are people who have done time. And there they are, and they're phenomenal facilitators because they've come to know themselves as something other than a gang member, other than some limited way of seeing themselves.
I guess I'm wondering, what is the key that allows them to get to that new level of self-understanding? There is a whole rich human potential kind of buried within most of us, I think. Mm-hmm. How are they able to begin to tap into that?
I think it's many levels. I think one is a very explicit statement and belief from somebody outside themselves saying, within you is that seed and that fundamental goodness. You may not know it's there, but I'm telling you that it's there. So somebody is explicitly telling them something that they've probably never heard before in their lives.
And probably the conditions of incarceration affirm the opposite for them on a continuing basis.
Exactly. So that's one thing. Then another thing is them understanding what has propelled their addiction and poor choices in life. There's a chapter in Houses of Healing called The Long and Winding Road from Childhood to Prison. And then starting the whole process of healing childhood wounds. And just that understanding, the liberation that comes from, this wasn't all my fault. My actions were my fault. I have to take 100% responsibility for that. But being the person I ended up being wasn't all my fault. I didn't have an environment that nurtured the best in me by any stretch of the imagination for a lot of these people.
I had to go through the program, several courses, several workshops to really get to the introspection that I needed to do to really understand those things.
Daniel Silva first read Robin's book while serving a decades-long sentence in California prisons, including time in a maximum security facility. He now leads a Sacramento-based organization called Self-Awareness and Recovery. It aims to promote the healing of currently incarcerated people, as well as at-risk youth in Northern California.
I used to read the book in my cell. I would do self-work, and I would work on areas that I felt I needed to work on myself. And that part was difficult because I had become this image, this other person that really wasn't me. Today I understand that there was always that good in me that we talk about, when we teach Houses of Healing, that it never leaves you. It's always in you. You're born with it. That spiritual nature that when your grandma tells you, hey, mijo, love your neighbors, they teach you to be kind, to, do all that. That doesn't leave you, And no matter what happens, and no matter how caught up you get and how much wrong you do, when you really start to take a good look, you see that good person that's still in you.
So for you, that required reconnecting to that part of yourself that had sort of gotten buried?
They call it the core self. I had to reconnect back to the core self in order for me to find that good individual that was always there.
How did you do that? How did you reconnect back to your core self?
Through understanding it, through, reading it, through practicing, through allowing the good in me to actually make the decisions and make the choices instead of the foggy part of me or that false image that I had, like I said, that I had picked up in all the wrong places.
A key aim of prisoner rehabilitation is emotional regulation and impulse control. It's the human condition that we give in sometimes to unhealthy or inappropriate instincts. And part of developing emotional maturity is when we learn how to override these tendencies. Some folks who end up behind bars may need to devote special attention to this important set of skills. And for former prisoner Alvin Kimbrough, self-care practices have helped him to build defenses against unproductive impulses.
I meditate morning and evening, but I pray morning and evening as well. It grounds me, and it just kind of gives me the ability to step out of myself and choose something that is higher than me that I tap into, so that if there's any situation where I find that I'm being triggered or some stressful situation that I'm anticipating towards the day that I might have anxiety over, prayer gives me the ability to kind of refuel and actually just be rejuvenated, to kind of have a momentum. So when I do go through the day, I have some force behind me. So the mindfulness is what I do during the day as I'm in the process. Before I speak or before I actually make a decision, I actually just take a few moments and get a little oxygen in my blood, and I may count backwards if I see some stressful situation in traffic. 10, 9, 8, 7. Right. Just try to, just recenter where I am. So those things help. And, I've been doing them now where there's just kind of something that you're used to. So they're all very essential to kind of just staying grounded. The other thing that is super important as far as emotional regulation is, although it's not one of the things like we just discussed, is consequential thinking. That's a huge deal. Because I am 57 years old. I came out of prison at 52 years old and went in my 20s. And I do not have the liberties of taking for granted that I have the liberties to do anything but what I'm going to do, which is be, having a wonderful, successful day. I will not allow, with complete autonomy, my day to go any other way than what I will it to be. At this stage, I can do that. Inside the institution, oftentimes that's sometimes done for you. They tell you to lock it up, you're going to lock it up. They tell you to stay on the white line, you're going to stay on the white line. And more importantly, they're going to put you in situations where you're going to be controlled. And as we used to say, you're going to mind somebody. And so, that kind of has a merit as well, because it teaches you, as I heard a warden tell me one time, look, man, you're an intelligent man. Either you control yourself or we going to control you. And there's prisoners that are, one thing I love about California is that anywhere you go, you can see some wonderful communities. I go all over the state with my job, and people wave. And when you're in a great community, people wave at you all the time. They're your neighbors, and they're fantastic, and you can have great neighbors. In institutions, you also have neighbors, and your neighbors can be decent people where, you guys play basketball and cards. There's places like that. And you can also have some neighbors that are very treacherous. And depending on you're going to dictate who your neighbors are. So, and your behavior. So I've had some horrible neighbors where no one should be around them. They should be locked in a room with the door shut, and I never want to see them again. Yeah, I don't care if they are my fellow prisoners, I just never want to see you again. And I've had some people that I miss, man. Yes. They were just life-changing men that have just given me so much wealth. And unfortunately, some of those men I would see out here, and I'm still grateful. We see each other, we hug each other, we're grateful because we have a shared experience. But at the end of the day, as far as finding a difficulty, not at this stage. I can control myself at this stage quite well.
That's a huge statement.
Yeah, you definitely will find peace. It's just, what path do you choose to get there?
We're exploring how people who are incarcerated can heal from their traumas in life. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. For more information about this segment, Helping Prisoners to Heal, and to obtain audio downloads or CDs, please visit humanmedia.org.
I know, speaking for myself personally, it definitely was hard for me. I was very impulsive, and one of the things when I wanted to change, I didn't know how to change.
Jerome Anderson, an ex-prisoner, has worked to rebuild his life. Today, he's part of self-awareness and recovery.
I'm just going to be honest with you. I became so deeply entrenched in my thinking distortions, and I was acting like everyone else to get this reputation. So when it was time for me to change, I didn't know how. And so it got to the point where people was like, man, I can't trust being around you because you'll put yourself and others in so much harm's way. It's like you don't care about yourself. I didn't know myself. And so emotional regulation, first and foremost, I had to understand what my emotions was besides just good or bad. Self-regulating, understanding my internal, my external triggers, knowing my warning signs, my physical cues, non-verbal body language, being able to go into a situation and let my gut speak louder than my head or my heart. And so that's one of the things with Robin Casarjian and the House of Healing. I've learned that I've always been a passionate person. I used it the wrong way. And so as I learned to start self-regulating, I started realizing that, man, it's like a fine-tuned car. When I take this car to the shop and I get these tires rotated, I get this oil change, and I spend a little love and care, put a little Armor All on this thing, and this baby drives clean.
Well, I was not expecting an oil change as part of this, but that's a pretty great example. So how would you kind of assess where you're currently at, Jerome, in terms of your ability to control and regulate your behavior? Because I think for almost everybody, we have to suppress some impulses, and it might not be easy.
Absolutely. One of the things I definitely do that helps out in my daily practices is the maintenance of it. Definitely having a support system like we have, our team. We're all in recovery in one form or fashion. Also being a life coach, a mentor, I'm constantly doing the work. I have people in my life that can speak to me and say, hey, look, I noticed that you might have said something, or even your body language or whatever it may be, just to continue to keep me accountable and mindful. But also it's my responsibility. I want to consistently show up every day kind. I want to show up every day dependable, reliable, passionate. And so to do that, I get a chance I fell in love with myself as a result of this. Not in an unhealthy way, but in a healthy way. I like the way I think. I enjoy the way I feel. I like being able to express myself in a way where other people are able to walk away with more understanding. And then when there's days when things don't work out so well, I still count my blessings because I'm no longer in the shoe. It was one of the things I had learned that I don't play fair. I didn't get along with people. And so I spent 8.5 years in the shoe. That was one of the best universities for me to learn who I was. And also, like Alvin said earlier, how to be a brother. I learned how to support other people. I learned how to actually listen. I realized one of my problems, I didn't know how to listen. I heard, but I didn't know how to listen.
A very hard thing for really everyone. Do you have daily practices that reinforce your own recovery?
Absolutely. I still work my steps. I definitely do positive affirmations. I use AIM as my A is for being aware of my physiological cues, my body, my internal, external triggers. I definitely am able to identify exactly where they're at, how they got heightened or triggered, where I'm at, and then also how I manage them. I do pleasant imagery, counting backwards, and also just to put some distance between my thought and my behavior, the actual actions that I want to take. And so because I used to be very impulsive, I'm mindful of that today. And so just to give me a little time, and I notice when I have a little bit more time between my initial automatic unconscious thought as opposed to me acting on it, that little space is a protective mechanism for myself to come up with the best choice, not only for myself, but for whomever I'm around.
How about for you, Daniel? Where would you say you're at regarding self-regulation and controlling your behavior?
I do meditation early in the morning when I wake up. I meditate. Sometimes mindful meditation, other times just breathing meditation, just to mellow myself out and kind of set the tone for the day. I find that I get to the office a whole lot more calmer, and I'm less stressed, because, it could be stressful in the job that we have. We're working with, troubled youth in the community. We work in schools and juvenile halls and places that where we see a lot of emotional imbalance, and sometimes we witness violence and things like that coming from the youth that we're trying to work with, and so sometimes it can get stressful. And then not only that, sometimes just other things, just life in general can get complicated. And so I try to maintain my meditation going daily. It's a daily ritual for me, waking up, and that's the first thing I do.
Which for former prisoners Daniel Silva, as well as Jerome Anderson and Alvin Kimbrough, can light the path for a new way of life, a remarkable example of human resilience. Again, Robin Casarjian of the Lionheart Foundation and author of Houses of Healing.
Within everyone is that core of goodness and wisdom and clarity, and there are many paths on the same road to that place within yourself. Some of them are more intellectual. You understand, somebody's explicitly saying this fundamental goodness exists within you. And then there are practices such as meditation and relaxation and various spiritual disciplines that help you to quiet yourself, to align with that part of yourself.
You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Antonio Oliart-Rose. Editorial assistance from Kathy Graham, Ken Rogers, and Rowan Edwards. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Devin Strolovich of KALW Public Radio in San Francisco. Thanks also to Steve Martin, Laura Carlo, and Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. Please subscribe to our free weekly podcast. The title is Humankind on Public Radio. You can find it at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all major podcast services, as well as through our website. Again, the podcast title is Humankind on Public Radio. And if you'd like to support our program, please visit humankindpodcast.org, and at the top, click on How You Can Help.
This segment, Helping Prisoners to Heal, is Humankind Program number 298.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. This is Humankind.